Very recently, the Democratic National Committee voted to strip superdelegates of a majority of their power to influence the nomination process in the party. The short of the long is that if there is any contention to the nomination, the superdelegates can show up, but they can't vote on the first ballot to determine the nomination, therefore giving the elected delegates the first crack at settling things. So what are superdelegates? Superdelegates are specifically delegates that come from one of four groups. The first is elected members of the Democratic National Committee, which is made up of chairs and vice chairs of the state parties, a number of specific identity groups, such as those for women and youth, and 75 at-large DNC members. The other three being the current Democratic governors, current members of Congress, and distinguished party leaders, which include former presidents, vice presidents, congressional leaders, and as well as a few former DNC chairs. In 2016, there were 20 individuals that belonged to this last group. Superdelegates, or about 15% of the total delegates at the National Convention, which nominates the Democratic Party's nominee for president, no longer can determine the winner of that nomination on the first vote, and those don't really count for most of the circumstances that would have happened since, well, before they were created in the first place. Wait a tick. What does all this mean? What is going on here, Izzy? What am I talking about? And most importantly, why am I talking about it? One of the critiques the Democratic Party has had for a while is this notion that it's a party of insiders, in quotes here, for whatever that might mean. To a degree, both major parties have had this label at various times, depending on how much prominence career politicians have at any given moment, and especially in how much influence they are believed to have over the important decisions of the party. And there's a strong current in the modern political landscape to reflexively hate the insider and to support the outsider, because the insider is always perceived as being part of the problem, whatever it may be, and the outsider is always the solution. This is the framing, and one can, of course, argue over if it's a reasonable view or not, but this is the current conventional wisdom, aka how it's seen by most, as far as the run-of-the-mill voter goes. So to be labeled an insider will always give you a handicap. Of course, who labels which politicians an insider and which an outsider is maybe an important question. For you see, whoever defines which is which gets to control the debate. Gets to give one candidate a handicap and the other a leg up. For example, around the events of the 2000 presidential election, there were a lot of, well, stuff going on. The shadows of the Clinton presidency, recounts, truck driving revelations, out of context quotes about the internet, stuff. But among those things of that election is the amazing storyline of the recently late John McCain. McCain entered political office for the first time on January 3, 1983, as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. He proceeded to stay there until 1987, where he moved on to the U.S. Senate, and from there he remained until his death a few days before this video was produced. In 2018. So, about 35 years in government when he died, and 17 in government before the 2000 election. So, 17 years in government at the time, and the story of McCain wasn't that he was a career politician, but that he was a maverick, a straight talker, and outsider? And his main opponent for the Republican nomination for president was one George W. Bush, whose father was president himself, yes, but guess when W entered office for the first time? 1995. He had been in office for less than a third the time as John McCain, and he was considered the insider candidate. A little weird, isn't it? Yeah, see how weird that is? Of course, but this difference in experiences in government never really came up much. It never really factored in. It was all about the fawning over McCain and his campaign slogans, military background, and interest in specific issues, not the fact that he was indeed a career politician by this point in his life. So yeah, this storyline of the insider who was new to politics facing off against the outsider who had been in office for 17 years was the focus of the Republican primaries. And it took McCain much further than he expected. Anyone expected, really. It's an example of what you can do when you do the correct thing in driving a narrative on this. And, how and getting the right people to back you up, say, in the media. That power to paint the world as you need it in order to get things how you want them, to give you an advantage. It's Very powerful. So why am I talking about this now? Insiders, narrative control, and superdelegates. Because it's important to talk about this all as a package, about just the notion of superdelegates and the Democratic Party. Because, especially in this context of deciding who is an insider and who is an outsider. But Izzy, why are you talking about all of this? Tell me, please, tell me. I'm talking about superdelegates at all because they have long been the prime example of the Democratic Party losing their struggle over this notion of insider versus outsider. To a degree, it's the party's fault, of course, as the creation of superdelegates was done out of fear, and they never had a strong rule in place to ensure it didn't tilt the field of play in the primaries while the votes were still being tallied. So it had gotten to look like the Democratic Party was putting a thumb on the scales in support of safer candidates, even if that wasn't technically the case. Or at least safer candidates for those who were running the party at the time. Kind of terrible optics, you see, independent of the truth of it or not. So before I go forward, I need to state clearly that I disagree with the premise of superdelegates at all, as they were conceived as well as how they were implemented in practice. They were conceived out of fear in the 1980s that the Democratic Party was faltering due to too much say in the nomination process by run-of-the-mill voters. This was a dramatically ridiculous conclusion to make. Having only won once since 1964 on the presidential level should have been a warning sign of something, but not that. During that period of time, the base of the Democratic Party was changing. The Democratic Party not only became the party of civil rights, but those that support civil rights started voting for the Democrats, and those that oppose civil rights started voting against the Democrats by supporting the Republican Party. And it was a race to see which the parties could fully integrate their new voter bases faster. And it was a race the Republicans had straight up won, even by that point. But short-sighted notions of fearing the party base and not understanding that those who led the party at the time were now representing a new coalition spread the creation of superdelegates because they didn't know their own voters. So yeah, the fact that they exist at all is kind of dumb. But I'm not here to tear down the party of the now. The party of 1981 and 1982, sure, because almost all the people that were running the show back then are now long gone. John McCain entered public office and died during that time. The sins of the party of the early 80s need not be used to condemn the party of the now, especially given the party of the now has taken the first big move to fix that mistake. I could go into the whole hoopla of why this came to pass in total, but I'm going to focus on that one thing I've already mentioned, this vision of party insiders, the optics issue, and how that perception has been used and abused in a very unfair fashion. The superdelegates have been used by a number of individuals, groups, and even a third party to try to prove that the Democratic Party is inherently corrupt and run totally by, quote, insiders, and thus cannot ever be trusted. One of the large sources of such a message is disaffected Sanders supporters who were sold on the idea that the nomination was stolen from Sanders out of some sort of desire, I guess, for an excuse to why the strung-ahead beliefs and wants didn't really come to pass. I am not saying all Sanders supporters believe this, but the most vocal folks I know on this tend to be of this political history. The trick is, though, the superdelegates didn't really decide the nomination. The voters did. I'm glad Sanders did well enough to light the fire that has provided much change in the party, but not just in the party rules, but in who even is running for office all across the country, inspiring people to get active, to get out there, sign up to be a candidate. And heck, this kind of enthusiasm for the cause I believe in to encourage action is kind of the reason I voted for him myself in the primary. Hint, hint. But the enthusiasm, the willingness to improve the party, and the means to do so wasn't good enough for some folks. Progress is never enough for some, you see. It must be all or nothing. And so the superdelegates were used as an excuse, a focus for the anger over the loss of Sanders. Even though Clinton got a majority of the pledged delegates from doing better in the primaries compared to Sanders. Rag on the primaries themselves, if you like, with the notion that the superdelegates stole the nomination from Sanders when Clinton got 54% of the pledged delegates is kind of ridiculous. And to be demanding that the superdelegates overturn those results is highly undemocratic. But guess what? I'm tired of talking about the Democratic Party's nomination process's main flaw, or the awkward rules for its primaries, flawed caucus nonsense, or how some states are just crap at running elections at all, independent of which party they're dealing with. I want to talk about the other group who cites fairly often superdelegates as the reason to hate on the Democrats. I'm going to talk about the Green Party and its nomination process, and specifically why any complaint by the Green Party about the Democrats having an insider problem is complete hypocritical bullshit. The Green Party in America is always most vocal when it's talking about the Democratic Party. The Dems are too centrist, the Dems are too insider, the Dems are cheaters, the Dems are this or that, the Dems eat babies or something, or whatever new issue that comes up where the Democratic Party is not 100% perfect on all the things, 100% of the time, because, they're not human, they're supposed to be super and perfect all the time, I guess. Some critiques they have are very valid. Others rely on either the nature of government, aka people who were in office 10 years ago and retired and or died tend not to be deciding policy anymore, guys. Move on. Or they generate narratives that don't quite make sense if you actually look at the details. Remember when I looked at the electoral history of W versus McCain? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about right here, actually. Yes, the Democratic nomination system is far from perfect. And even with superdelegates, it's much more democratic in nature compared to the Republican Party system, which operates somewhere between the DNC model and the fairly undemocratic electoral college system for the general election. Some states, for the Republicans, award all their delegates to the winner, and even if that winner only got, say, 25% of the vote in a split field. A quarter of support, and bam, you get dozens upon dozens of, or even hundreds of delegates. So yeah, the RNC model is far from perfect, as many of the flaws in the system used by the Democrats, and a few extra ones put on top. Now, I'm not here to compare the Democrats to the Republicans. The Republicans are ridiculous in their own ways, but they struggle with the insider narrative themselves, given, how they kind of run the entire government right now, and are trying desperately to prevent that perception from really sinking in. Okay, pretend we're not in charge, and blame everyone else for our own faults. Woo! Now, instead, I'm going to compare the Democratic nomination process to that of the loudest, most critical, left-leaning party there is of them, the Green Party. To do that, I need to give a brief rundown of the Democratic nomination process. Bear with me. The Democratic nomination process for 2016 was as such. The party nominee was elected in a national convention that took place on July 25th through 28th in 2016. Delegates at the convention voted on and approved a nominee for vice president and president. The delegates at the convention were either selected by the states through a nomination process or attained their position as delegates versus the superdelegate definitions already described. The nomination contest consisted of a series of primaries and caucuses. All states and most territories, including the District of Columbia, held contests and had delegates vote at the convention and were required to distribute the delegates proportional to the candidate using agreed-upon rules. The number of delegates each contest had to award was determined by a formula that generally awarded most delegates to states with large party participation so as to best have the people of the party best be represented. The exact rules of these contests varies, with some having voting be open to anyone, others being exclusive to those registered to the party, and the exact process of caucuses being mostly state party controlled, with potentially odd quirks and rules for each particular state. A primary is an election type contest where one goes to a polling place and votes like any other election, while a caucus is halfway between a primary and convention in that anyone participating shows up and selects delegates that go on to the next level of the nomination process, which represents specific candidates in a group meeting sort of format. Such caucus delegate selections may include intermediate county, district, and state-level conventions to determine the final outcome of the state delegate slate. As I said, state rules vary. In 2016, there were 4,051 pledged delegates and 712 superdelegates. Whew! Now for the quick rundown of the Green Party nomination. Remember, folks, the Greens are supposed to be the ones who are more pure and representative, right? Keep that in mind as I give the rundown. The Green Party nomination process of 2016 included a convention on August 4th through 7th in 2016, where it elected its party's nominees. Delegates to the convention voted on and approved a nominee for president and vice president. The delegates to the convention were either selected by the states through a nomination process or through some other means. As of writing the script, 73 of the 402 delegates, or 18%, were determined by a process for which I could not get reliable information on, but were not determined by any state-level contests whatsoever. The nomination contests that were held consisted of primaries, caucuses, or state conventions. 34 states, the District of Columbia, and 2 identity group caucuses held contests to award delegates, while the remaining states and territories did not. The number of delegates each contest had to award was determined by a formula or by giving states that did not have an accredited state party 4 delegates and 2 to the territories of Puerto Rico, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, and U.S. Virgin Islands, and the 2 group caucuses. The exact rules of the contest varies. Primaries and caucuses work the same hypothetically as they would for any other party, but again, information is scarce on a number of the contests beyond some mentions in Facebook, make it rot, groups. Conventions, which the states do not have at a first level contest in the democratic system, though they are later stages for caucuses and the tiered selection of delegates in some cases, do exist for the Green Party as a first level contest, and if their process is as advertised, it's just a single big meeting of the party to pick some delegates to go to the National Convention. Again, rules vary by state on all these specifics. So did you spot the differences? Or the things that are weirdly the same? 15% of the delegates to the DNC were superdelegates in 2016, while 18% of the Green Party delegates were something? Now, this is maybe a little unfair, perhaps, as these delegates represent the states and territories that didn't have contests at all. Well, maybe it's not super unfair. After all, these delegates seem to just kind of appear out of nowhere at the Green Party National Convention and just kind of got to work. They just sort of showed up. Were they party insiders? Maybe my research kind of failed in garnering more details on these delegates. Feel free to comment below if I'm wrong on this. But it does kind of spell like, almost a fifth of the Green Party convention was determined by some, I don't know, undemocratic method. And this is a larger percentage than that of the Democratic Party convention. Yeah. Interesting, isn't it? But you know what? This top-level scan doesn't tell the full story. Nope. It doesn't give the full comparison between the two parties. If we're going to look at which one of these two parties is more representative of its voters, we gotta dig deeper and look at the state contests. I mean, maybe my lack of stumbling upon the details and my uncertainty is just a me problem. And so maybe the Green Party nomination is way more representative of their voters than the Democratic Party process. If that's the case, then we should be able to look at other areas and find the Greens outshining the Democrats all over the place, right? Right? The first thing I want to look at is the Green Party state conventions. 18 states had conventions of various sorts without caucuses. Finding exact information on these conventions is difficult. Looking at an example of the results of these conventions may be informative, including the difficulty of finding that information. For instance, the Colorado Convention, where Stein got all 5 delegates to the National Convention, is maybe an interesting one to look at. How many people showed up at this convention to determine these 5 delegates? I have no idea. Facebook, may it rot, says 30 people were in attendance, but I have no idea if this is accurate. All those and many more could have shown up, or less than half. The only firm information I could track down says that Stein got all but 4 votes at the convention, but didn't give a vote total. For all I know, she got 5 votes to 4, and got all the delegates somehow. Maybe she got 10,000 votes to 4. I don't really know. But doesn't it seem a bit strange that Stein would get such a complete support in one state, while on the same day in Ohio, another convention state, being held at the same time, she only got 6 delegates of the 9? I have percentages of support in Ohio at least, and she only got 61% support there. With still like raw vote totals, of course, but at least it's something. But it gets stranger. Connecticut, the total number of votes at the convention was 27, with yes, Stein winning the convention by getting 24 votes, and taking 6 of the 7 delegates with her. Interesting. Yes, 27 votes in total to determine 7 delegates to the Green Party National Convention. These are kind of super low numbers, which might be a problem if your interest is having, say, people of your party, your actual voters, participating in the process. 27 people showing up to determine the fate of 7 delegates to the Green Party National Convention. Not a small percentage of the total delegates, given that there's only about 400. Yeah, that's a little weird. Minnesota Green Caucus had a total of 83 people making the decision. Delaware, 14 people showed up. Heck, even the primaries, the ones where people just kind of show up and vote, were lean affairs for the Greens, with Virginia having a whopping vote total of 46 statewide. Get 2 friends together, and you too can get any candidate you'd like a delegate to the Green Party National Convention. Neat, huh? The only state with any sizable vote in the Green Party primary was California, but to win a delegate there to the National Convention, there you'd only need to find a few hundred like-minded friends. then you can get anyone you like to be delegate, I guess. So you know what? The Green Party nomination is very much a case of the few determining the nominee. Even for a third party. I mean, the Libertarians are still worse, but, You see, they had dozens, count them, dozens of people selecting the nominee for a party that still managed to get over 1 million votes total in the general election. That's a lot of power in the hands of the very, very, very few. Meanwhile, even the small state contests for the Democrats had thousands of voters seeking to nab delegates for their candidate of choice, and a number of states with hundreds of thousands or millions of votes making the decision. Delegates that, in the end, represent the people of the party of those states fairly well, despite the conspiracy theories claiming they didn't. Meanwhile, the Green Party was determining large percentages of their national convention delegates with less people that supported Martin O'Malley in the Iowa caucuses. You remember Martin O'Malley, right? He was that guy that ran in 2016 that no one remembers. Anywho, moving on. And these very few people at the conventions, who are they? Like, with the difficulty finding any numbers in some places for these conventions at all, I can't exactly find information on how many of these convention attendees might be, quote, Green Party insiders. Those people that are, by default, the bad guys I was talking about earlier. The enemy that must be feared and are obviously corrupt because the Green Party says so. Maybe Delaware's delegates were chosen entirely by the state party chair and vice chair. Those people that in the Democratic Party would be called superdelegates and quite obvious about their role. A small selection of the people that run the state Green Party could make all the decisions without ever consulting anyone outside that group. A group who maybe also happen to be the same people that elected them to that very position in the first place. And so you know what? 14 random party insiders determining the fate of 6,103 Delaware Green Party voters in the general election doesn't seem exactly fair to me. I can't help but think back to those 73 delegates marked as coming from other for the National Green Party Convention. They in the end didn't matter to the determination of the Green Party nomination, but it does beg the question of who is determining how any of this works? Who are these delegates and how are they selected? Who is really running the show in the Green Party presidential nomination process? Is it their voters? Doesn't really look like it at all. It looks more like a few select folks determine the vast majority of the delegates, in state after state. What the Greens like to claim the Democrats do? Given the heavy lean towards Stein overall in the more democratically determined delegations, it's pretty clear she'd have probably won the Green Party nomination in a straight vote. But polling all or nearly all the delegates all the time in majority of the states? Please. I wasn't born yesterday, Jill. Come on. The only state she lost was the home to William Kremel, who managed to get 13 votes to her 10, to win 5 of the 8 delegates from that state. It's all not a good picture so far. I know it doesn't translate well, but this notion that the Green Party nomination process should be ignored when Green Party supporters complain endlessly about the Democratic nomination process causes my eyes to roll. Because really, come on guys. And I haven't even gotten started on how these contests are mathematically inferior in representing the will of the Green Party voter compared to the contests of the Democratic primaries. It's math time, folks. Mwah! So, which party, the Democrats or the Greens, have nomination contests that better represent their voters? Specifically, how does the participation rates of the respective primaries match up to the total general election votes these parties get? Does one party have noticeably higher percentage of general election voters represented in their primary, caucus, or convention? I ask this question in this way in particular because the Democratic Party has way more support in the general election compared to the Green Party, so maybe the issue of dozens being involved in the Green Party is just a problem of small numbers for the party in total. Having a smaller party, you get smaller participation in nomination contests, and therefore, things like super shady conventions that are almost impossible to research reliable numbers on would make sense, I guess. And my critiques thus far would be totally unfair and therefore unjustified. So let's look at the numbers. Begin! Colorado. 123,457 people voted in the Democratic primary there. In the general election, Clinton, the Democratic nominee, got a little over 1.3 million votes, so about 10% of her general election voters were likely participants in the party's primary. Meanwhile, Jill Stein received 38,437 votes in the general election, which means that if the 30-something number from Facebook, may it rot, for the state convention represents the number of people at the Green Party nomination convention in Colorado, then the convention represented an amazingly high 0.1% of her voters, which, if you're paying attention to the math, is a factor of 100 less representative than the Democrats. That's ridiculously unrepresentative. Maybe it's just a Colorado problem. What about other states? Tennessee was won by Trump. People attending the Green Party state convention, about 12 if Facebook, may it rot, is to be believed. Total Green Party votes of the general election, 15,993. So Stein got probably 1,066.2 votes for each state convention vote in Tennessee. Or flip that around, the participation at the state party convention was about 0.075% of our state vote total in the general. Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, in the general election, Clinton got 870,695 votes, and there were 372,222 people who voted in the Democratic primary. That's about 43% of the people who voted in the general election likely to participate in the primary too. That is very representative of the state Democratic Party and its voters. Greens lose again here. Big time. Like massively. It's huge. It's huge and large. What about, I don't know, a liberal state, like Vermont? Oh wait. The Greens didn't have any contest there. No primary, no caucus, no convention. They don't really got anything going from there. Alright, Connecticut it is then. The Green Convention in Connecticut had 27 votes, as already stated. They got, in the general election, 22,841 votes, and so they have a respectable, for the Green Party contest so far, 0.12% of their votes getting a say in their party nomination, probably. As the Democrats, well, Clinton got 897,572 votes in the general, and the Democrats had 328,255 votes in the primary, for 36.6% participation. Yeah, so what about non-conventions? Surely Greens do better there, in anything else. Well, generally, kinda, maybe. Minnesota had a caucus with 83 people who showed up. Yes, 83 people statewide is the only number I could pin down for this one. Let's cut to the chase. Stein got 36,991 votes in the general election for a participation rate of 0.22%, while Clinton got 1,367,825 votes in the general, compared to 204,610 participating in the Democratic caucuses, for a participation rate of a low 15%. Oh my, that's pretty low. Hey, it was a caucus in both cases here, so it's not exactly apples to oranges, right? The Greens just can't seem to beat the 1% barrier. So let's find a primary. Conventions and caucuses aren't doing well for the Greens in this comparison. Running out of states, though. What about the Virginia Green Party primary? Well, only 46 people voted in that one. Illinois? 137 people voted for that one. Uber liberal Massachusetts? 1,596 people there. So maybe they got a chance for the Green Party nomination system to finally beat the Democrats. Come on, guys. For once, let's go to the numbers. Green totaled the general election in Massachusetts 47,661 for a participation rate of 3.3%. Finally, single digits. And the Democrats? Clinton got 1,995,196 votes in the general, and 1,215,970 voted in the primary. A primary participation rate to general election vote of 61%. Seems there's not a lot of hope for the Greens here. They struggle to get to being even 10% as representative of their own party, these things, compared to the Democrats. Yeah, This isn't looking good for them, guys. Oh no. It's almost like the Democratic primaries are way more in tune with their voters or something. For all their flaws and esoteric rules, the winner here is kind of clear, guys. Even in California, a state that's great for the Greens and their participation rates, the Democrats were hitting 59% participation compared to the Greens with only 5.3%. And that's as good as it gets to the Greens anywhere. But Izzy, the Greens are such a small party that's barely organized. It doesn't even have recognition of itself in a bunch of states and struggles to get ballot access without help from the Republican Party, and here's a bunch of other excuses. Yeah, they are a small party. They are a small party that's terrible at getting itself together. Jeepers. And it appears to be way more beholden to a small selection of hardcore partisan insiders than the Democratic Party has been since, well, before I was born. It can't even get enough true believers together to get a functioning party in large parts of the country so it can hold any contest in a bunch of states, including very liberal states, and barely enough in a bunch more. It's disorganized and bad at reporting the most basic stats and goings-on of their exclusive contests, like attendance and vote totals. You know, the easy stuff. They appear highly disinterested in becoming anything other than a spoiler in the general election. They play this ridiculous game of throwing stones where they live in the most shatter-prone of glass houses, and for some reason, the Green Party thinks people like me should be giving my vote to them. No? So, finally to the thesis of this video. Yes, the Democratic Party has issues, and has made some bad mistakes in its past. But guess what? They're trying to actually fix things. The people in the party are working through it to find a solution that makes the Democratic Party better. Meanwhile, the Green Party and their allies only have complaints. They only know how to throw stones. They're not doing a damn thing to fix anything. And given how long they've had to fix things, to get organized, like all the critics have been telling them to do since day one, it's pretty clear they're not interested in actually doing anything of the sort either. They're not interested in winning elections. They're not interested in actually making progress on the causes they claim to care so deeply about. They're not interested in progress, and they more often than not cause problems instead of solve them. They're not interested in progress, because if they were, they'd maybe realize, hey, maybe, just maybe, if we're going to make the world a better place, we should learn to make our own party a little bit better, a little bit more small d democratic. Until they do, the Green Party will remain at best a joke, and at worst, a subsidized arm of, well, anybody who hates the Democratic Party, Republicans, like they are right now. And they will continue to do this election, next election, and many, many, many more elections to come, until finally they get their heads out of their asses and fix their own house. But discussions on all that is maybe for another video at some point. Anywho, thank you very much. This has been Dr. Isix reminding you that sometimes those that only complain about the Democrats should be reminded of the flaws that they have in themselves on occasion. Because, baby, they got plenty.